Hi, Dr. Dolly. I have a rent versus buy question. We live in Houston, Texas, where rent is significantly cheaper than the cost of owning. Should we just rent forever? What else should we consider? I'm an engineer and my husband is a physician. We're debt free and not looking to change jobs or locations in the foreseeable future. Calculating with my husband's income of $370,000 and using the 2x rule, we can afford to purchase a $700,000 home. Assuming a 20% down and current interest rate of 7.875%, the monthly mortgage is upwards of 5,800 with taxes and insurance. I can rent the exact same home for 40% less my mortgage at 3,500. Why not just rent forever and invest the $2,000 difference between the mortgage and the rent? Thank you so much for all that you do. We've been avid followers since 2015 and wouldn't be where we are without you.
All right. Thanks for that great question, Melody. Rent versus buy, renting forever. Man, what do you tell her?
Well, I thought this was a great question. So usually the rent versus buy question comes from people who are early in their career, maybe in medical school or in training. And the answer to them is usually you should just rent because you don't know where you're going to be. You've got better things to do with your time than maintaining a house and better things to do with your money, like managing your student loans. But this is a couple who's established in their career, they're established where they live, and they're just wondering if they should forego expensive home ownership and rent. And I think there are arguments to be made for both sides. The cost of a mortgage is just the start of your homeowner costs. There's also obviously your taxes. There's homeownership, home repair, and it can really add up. Whereas rent is all you're going to have to pay. So, in Americans, we tend to think of homeownership as a path to wealth. I think there are because historically homes appreciate over time. And for some people, it's sort of a forced savings account. But this couple obviously is very disciplined and high achieving. And I'm sure they have the discipline to save that difference every month and invest it wisely for the long term. So I think you could certainly make an argument for them renting long term. It wasn't clear to me from this question if they want to be homeowners. Another question I hear a lot right now is, should we buy right now when the rates are high, or should we wait until rates go down? And the answer to that is that we don't know that rates are going to go down. They could just as easily go up again. We're actually still in fairly low interest rate territory if you look at the long-term history of mortgage rates. So rates could go up again. And I think the answer to that question really is figure out how much house you can afford right now, including your interest payment, and then buy that house and be happy with it. But if they don't want to be homeowners, if that's not the right fit for them, then they should rent and not worry about what everyone else is doing. That was my take on this question. What do you think?
Yeah, the mortgage thing cracks me up, the mortgage rate thing, right? Our first mortgage in 99 was 8%. Our second mortgage in 2006 was 6.25%.
Mm-hmm.
The home we're in now, by the time we paid it off, it was at 2.75%. That was not normal, right? Normal mortgage rates are 6 or 8%. So people talk about them being high. I view that as far closer to what normal is going to be than what we experienced the last few years. And I think people that are expecting mortgage rates to go back to 3 or 4%, I think they're up in the night. I don't think that's going to happen. If you're not going to buy at a rate of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9%, you're probably not buying anytime soon, and maybe never. So I don't think you can let the interest rates by themselves scare you off and keep you from buying. And I think it's important that we talk in general about this and then talk specifically about their situation, because in general, a rent payment is going to be higher than the mortgage payment on the same house. And it has to be that way, or real estate investing makes no sense whatsoever. Because a real estate investor has to, their only source of income is rent. And they've got to cover all their expenses and get a profit off of that, right? So they've got to be able to pay the mortgage. They got to be able to pay insurance, utilities, repairs, vacancies, property management fees, all that stuff. Plus, presumably have a little bit of positive cash flow. And so the natural situation is that rent should be more than a mortgage. That is clearly not the case in their situation. I've run into other people. It's often in the Bay Area, it seems like, where the cost of a mortgage, even when rates were low, was outrageous compared to what they could rent basically the same or a similar house for. I don't know that I expected to see that in Houston, though. But apparently they're seeing it in Houston as well. And so you've got to look at your individual situation if that varies from the general rule. And in this case, it does. And in that case, buying in this situation only gets you two things. One, it's a speculation play that for whatever reason, that house is going to continue to appreciate like crazy. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. But that seems like a little bit of a risky thing to bet on. And two, some people just like owning. You can paint the walls. You don't have to ask anybody permission to do stuff. And so I think there's some value to that. A lot of people want to own a home. It's one of their life goals. And as you mentioned, I think if that's not one of your life goals, then you may come out with a better deal renting. But pay attention to it year to year to year. I wouldn't be surprised at all if in 2 or 3 years, those numbers reverse themselves. Whether rents go up or whether the cost of housing goes down or flatlines or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if that situation reverses itself. So I'd pay attention to it and be willing to change if at some point down the road ownership does make more sense. As a general rule, I'm a big fan of ownership, though. I think most docs probably ought to aim to own their home at some point during their career.
No, I agree. And one of the benefits of a mortgage is that you know exactly what you're paying every month for the next 15 or 30 years. And of course, you don't know that with rent, and rent always goes up over time, as do home repair costs, as do insurance costs and taxes. So you just have to watch that number and see what it does, and be prepared. And maybe part of your investing she said she had a $2,000 difference between rent and mortgage. Maybe part of her investing is into a fund, so they could at some point buy a house if that makes sense for them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this question comes up in many different variations. One variation you see essentially is people wondering, should they buy a house when they're ready to buy the house, when their, life is at the place that they should buy a house, or should you wait until it seems to be a good deal? Whether that's because rates are low, it's because, rents are high relative to the cost of buying a house. Should it be more driven by your personal life or more driven by the macroeconomic environment? I've always leaned toward your personal life, but when you see it get really out of whack, like in this sort of situation, it makes you wonder if that's the right advice to be giving out.
No, I agree with that, because the flip side of waiting until the market seems right is that you can then buy because you have fear of missing out, because everyone else is buying, because it seems like a good market to get into, without really thinking through your personal reasons for doing it, and then coming to regret it. And I think we've seen that some in the last few years, people who rush to invest in real estate when rates were really low and when everyone's all excited about investing in real estate. And some people who are doing even now, investing when maybe isn't the right move for them. And I think in a few years, we're going to see properties come onto the market when people realize it wasn't actually the right move for them. So I think you just have to buy what you can when the time is right for you personally. When you have a down payment saved up, when you're stable in your personal life and your professional life, then go ahead and pull the trigger, and don't worry so much about what the interest rates are doing. The payment's going to be the same. It's just some's going to the bank and some's going towards your equity. And you can't control everything.
And recognize that sometimes this is going to work out well for you and sometimes it's not. Like
It is.
we bought a house in 2006, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
kind of knew things were bubbly. It wasn't, a complete mystery that chances were good things could implode in 2006. Prices had been going through the roof for the prior 3 years. And so we hedged a little bit in that we bought a house that was much less expensive than what we could afford. It was
Mm-hmm.
about 1x. Our mortgage was about 1x our income. And that was on a low income. That was on a military income. And then when we went to move in 2010, it was a completely opposite environment. It was a total buyer's market. We looked at 30 homes, and the only
Mm-hmm.
one that sold over the next 6 months was the one we bought. None of the rest of them even sold. And obviously, we got a much better deal on the second home than we did on the first home. In fact, we sold that first home after 9 years, still at a loss. And luckily, the second home was much more expensive than the first home. And so it ended up working out fine for us overall. But basically, we were just buying when it made sense for us to buy in our personal lives. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it's possible that it doesn't always work out well for you doing that. But I think as long as you stay within some reasonable guidelines, you'll be okay in the end.
I agree. But I think one more thing I would say about that is that people get very caught up in this idea of real estate appreciating. And it typically does, but real estate is so hyper local. Even in neighborhoods within the same city can have different appreciation patterns. There's a real estate cycle that people write entire books about. None of it really based on a lot of science. And so you can't always count on appreciation either, or you can't count on a certain amount of appreciation. You just have to buy a house because you want to live in it and it works for you. And then the appreciation is a nice extra, but you can't bank on it literally.
I'm not even sure it's that nice. We might be better off if homes didn't appreciate,
Why do you say that?
ways, because what happens when your home appreciates? Well, your property taxes go up, and mine have gone up, I don't know, maybe 100%, 13 years I've been
Yeah.
in this home.
Yeah, they probably have. Yeah.
And the only time appreciation really hurts you, because you're going to need a place to live. If you sell one house, you got to move into another one that's also appreciated most of the time. The only time it really hurts you is when you're not in the game. When you
Hmm.
don't own anything at all, then that's the fear, right? We all fear if we wait to buy, it's going to get so expensive, we won't be able to afford to buy it all. We'll pay some
Hmm.
ridiculous price later. And I think that's the fear that drives a lot of people to maybe buy before they're 100% ready to buy.
Hmm. I agree. I agree. So I think our answer to this caller is, if renting is right for you, then keep on renting and investing, and you're obviously doing great.
Yeah, I agree. And watch it, because that might change.
Yeah.
The hosts of The White Coat Investor are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is for your entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.